William, Events and Communications Lead here at Career Foundry, and tonight is all about SQL or SQL. It's got two ways you can pronounce it, SQL, SQL. Both ways go, and we're joined once again by Alex Freeberg, who is the host of Alex the Analyst YouTube channel. And I know for a fact that there's a lot of Alex fans out there tonight, also because this is being streamed on Alex's YouTube channel. So welcome back to the channel, all of Alex's fans. We love your energy. We love to see your questions. Also, we love your enthusiasm for data cleaning. This is one thing that I've seen with Alex's fans, very much into data cleaning. But yes, tonight's all about SQL from beginner to advanced in 1 hour. And whilst people are joining, and if you're joining on Big Marker, just drop your name, why you're interested in data analytics and where you're joining from, because we usually get a super international crowd and it's great to see where everyone is joining from. Before we kick off, let me just briefly explain what Career Foundry is, who we are. So Career Foundry is the online school for your career change into tech, and we guide you from complete beginner to job-ready professional in data analytics and help you land your first job in the field. We're not any old school. Our programs are so flexible that you don't need to quit your day job to change careers, and you get regular one-to-one mentorship from not one, but two industry professionals. So that's a mentor and a tutor. That's our dual mentorship model. And if you don't land a job within 180 days of graduation, we refund your tuition in full. So that's our job guarantee. If you've got any specific questions about Career Foundry or the curriculum or anything that we offer our data analytics program, I do recommend booking a call with a program advisor. So if you're joining us on Big Market, you can just click the sticky note. And if you're watching Alex's live stream, there is a book a call link in the description below. I don't want to take away the thunder from Alex, though. Alex, I'm passing it over to you. I am going to disappear into the background, but save all your questions at the end because we will be having a live Q&A, which I'm very much looking forward to. So get your questions in on YouTube, Big Market, and LinkedIn, and we will get those answered. And Alex, it's over to you. I'm disappearing into the ether.
All right, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Hey, everybody. I'm super excited to do this webinar specifically because if you know me, I am a huge SQL fan. I would consider it my bread and butter, my go-to. It's what I think I am one of the, in my tech stack, at least for personally, I think SQL is like one of my best skills. And so I'm hopefully going to kind of drive this from very beginner, really the basics, all the way up to some of the more advanced things that I use. We may not go crazy in depth. We're not going to do doing live demos or stuff like that, although that sounds really fun. But what we will be doing is we'll be doing a lot of examples. So I'll kind of walk through why you need to know this. And as it gets more advanced, if you're kind of a beginner SQL user, you may never have seen some of these things, and that's okay. Or you may not even have known that SQL does these things, but I promise you it does. And I'll kind of walk through how it works and why you might want to learn it so that, you can progress your learning. And a lot of these things that are in here are hopefully things that you recognize. So we're gonna go ahead and get started. This is just me. Hopefully you know who I am, but if you don't know who I am, my name's Alex. Check out my YouTube channel. All right, let's get going. So again, starting at the very basics, I'm assuming that you came in here knowing nothing about SQL. And if you already do, then this should seem like a breeze to you. But then again, it'll progress. Now I only have an hour or a little bit less. So I'm going to try to go pretty quick because I also want to answer some questions at the end. So let's get started. What is SQL? So SQL is really just the way that you query the data. So there's SQL databases, which we'll get to, I think, in the next slide a little bit, which is how the data is stored. But then you have SQL, which is the structured query language. And I wrote a programming language, but I know that's really controversial. It's more of a query language. When you think programming languages, you're thinking of R or Python or Rust or C++. Those are more traditional programming languages. But some people call SQL a programming language. And a lot of what SQL is used for is just a standard way to interact with your data. It's just a way for anybody who's using it to be able to write and reproduce exactly how to retrieve that data. And it's used in a lot of different things. It's not just data statically or data, just sitting in a database. Oftentimes, it's also really dynamic databases when you're working with like web dev or backend systems, as well as data analysis, which is mostly what I've used it for. But I've also, recently within the past year or two, really been using it a lot with some more dynamic databases that are a lot of moving parts, and it gets pretty crazy. I say crazy, but it may not be crazy to you. So we're going to start off by just kind of understanding what a database is, what a table is, and then we'll go from there to actually about writing SQL queries and how to actually retrieve that data. So a database and a table. So the database is going to be a collection of a lot of data. So a lot of tables, views. It can be a lot of different things, and the database is what really stores everything in one central place, which is great because you don't want to have to go and piece everything together from different sources. You kind of gather all those sources and then you put it into these databases. So these tables are then what's within a database. And the table's like an Excel spreadsheet. That's how I like to describe it. It's just columns and rows of data with different data types. And that's really all it is. Now in this screenshot here, I try to make it as big as I could. In the screenshot here, this is just a MySQL database. And you can see on this left-hand side, we have a database called Bakery. And then we have tables underneath that. So these are all different tables within one database. And so you can store 10, 20, 30, 50, 100 different tables within one database. Now, underneath that, we also have things like views, stored procedures, and functions and other things, but we'll kind of talk about more of that stuff near the end because some of those things are a little bit more advanced. But that's what it is. And so as you can see here, I have this query, very simple, saying select everything from this database and table. And then we have a little output. Now, we'll get to that in a little bit, but just to kind of prime you for what's coming when we actually start querying or learning about how to query. But that's where the data is stored. Next, I want to talk a little, just a tiny note on DQL, DDL, and DML. Now, when you're actually using it, knowing these isn't like the most important thing. There's actually a lot of other ones as well, but most data analysts don't use these or don't use the other ones. These are primarily the ones that most data professionals, data scientists, data analysts, business analysts, these are the ones that they're going to use. And they're basically just ways of saying, here are the types of statements and functions and things you can use that you will use within SQL. So we have DQL, which is just the query language. That's how we select our data. Then we have DDL, which is the definition language. So we're creating tables, we're altering tables, we're dropping tables or dropping other things, but as an example. And then we have DML. Now this is where you're inserting, updating, and deleting from your table. And you can see a little example here about how those are used. So the DQL is just selecting your data. The DDL is actually creating a table. And then the DML is inserting data into that table. Let's go to the next one. So now we're going to get, I kind of have gone pretty quick so far. I'm going to start slowing down a little bit because this is where everything starts getting, in my opinion, a lot more interesting. So when you're in a real job, when you're a data analyst and you're given a lot of data, typically what they're going to want most of your work is going to be is around filtering and sorting and kind of doing exploratory data analysis or doing, that may not be the main part of what you do, but you're going to have to do this. So knowing how to filter and sort your data is extremely important. So filtering just allows you to specify exactly what you want to pull from that data. For example, we have a table that has 10 million rows of data and 100 columns. That's a lot of data. Most likely you don't need all of that. So what filtering allows you to do is say, okay, I just want these 3 columns and I only want it where it equals this or where it includes this type of information. So we can specify what we're pulling. Sorting the data talks about just arranging it. So we're just making it look a little better in the output or changing how it's formatted, which, we can, it just helps with visualizing the data a little bit easier. So if I was working with a price, I could say I want to do it in ascending order or descending order. I could see the lowest price or the highest price first. And a lot of these things are, they're very simple, but as you get more advanced, they become very, very important. And I don't want to ruin some stuff later on, the more advanced stuff, but even the small things of just sorting your data actually has big implications in how your data is exported or how the data is put into products and all these different things. So filtering and sorting data is very, very important. Here's just a quick example of filtering data. So in this database, we're looking at bakery employees. And in these where statement, this is where we're going to say, here's what I actually want to see in my output. So I'm saying where the salary is greater than 40,000 and the department is equal to bakery. So here we can see all the salaries are greater than 40,000. And then we have our department column, and that's only the bakery. So you can also see my wife. She's the lead baker there. She's the lead baker at our house, which is why she's the lead baker in this table. Now we also have sorting data, and sorting data, we're just doing the exact same columns that we were doing before, or the exact same table that we were doing before. But now we're using order by. And order by is just saying, okay, I have my data. I don't want to filter it because we're not removing or specifying what data we're pulling. Now we're just saying how it's displayed in the output. So then we're ordering by, in this one, we're doing department. So we can specify we want department in ascending, which means lowest to highest, or it means in alphabetical order, A to Z. And so here we're doing it on the department. We have bakery first, because that's B, and then marketing next. And then, of course, we have the title. So we're able to order on multiple columns, and you can do as many columns as are in that table. You could do every single one if you wanted to, although I am positive it would become completely redundant. But you can filter, or you can order on multiple tables or columns, sorry. Next, this is I don't want to say the most important thing for beginners, but it's one of the most important things, grouping and aggregating data. So let's just talk about what it is, and then we'll look at an example. So grouping data refers to combining similar values in a column, and then we can perform something called an aggregate function. And these things should be something you've heard about before. If you've ever used Excel, you've heard of things like sum or the average or the median or the mean. These types of aggregate functions are things that you can apply to those groupings. And so they're really, really important because you have, especially with categorical data, you have a lot of data, and you want to see, okay, for just this company, or for each company, what is their profits, or what is their customer retention, or all these different things. You can look at that at a much larger level than just the individual row level, which may only give you a tiny snapshot of the data. So it's really great for creating reports, statistical analysis, and especially when you're trying to look at really large data sets with just millions of rows. Grouping and aggregating data is extremely important to know. So let's take a look at this example. So in our employees table, we want to group based off of the department. Now remember, we had about 4 employees per department. So there were 4 employees in the bakery, I think 4 in the marketing, and we just wanted to look at the average salary. Now, before, when we were looking at it, we were looking at each person. So each person had a salary, and that's great, but we want to kind of see at a larger level, what are all of their salaries combined? What is the average? So that's what grouping allows us to do. So we're grouping by, you can see the group by, we're grouping by department, but up above, we also have to select the department and then use our aggregate function. And for this, we're just using average. And so we're saying the average salary. Then we're also naming our column there as salary, and that's just an alias of that output. And so we're grouping by that department. So the department is what's being grouped. All 4 of those people who are in bakery, all 4 of those people who are in marketing are now put into one row, and then we're allowed to put these aggregate functions on them. And this is just kind of the tip of the iceberg, because we're going to get to some more advanced things that involve grouping data as well. But in its simplest form, this is something that I personally use every single time I use SQL. I mean, it's just so incredibly common to need to group data and look at aggregate functions on it. So if you're just starting out, these 2 things that we've just looked at, which is where, order by, and grouping, if you can learn those 3 things really well, that's 70% of what you're going to be doing with basic SQL. So you get into a job as your first job as a data analyst, and this is kind of the stuff that you need to know. And so this is also really good to know for technical interview questions as well. So if you're interviewing and they ask you about these things, this is something that you should know. Let's go on to the next one. Let me get a sip of water real quick. The next thing is joins and subqueries. Now, bit more advanced. Now, joins and subqueries aren't crazy advanced, but when I was first starting out, joins just like blew my mind. I couldn't understand it at all. I was like, it didn't connect with me for whatever reason. And I failed many a technical interview because I didn't know things like joins and subqueries. So let's talk about what they are. Joins are fundamental. If we, kind of think back to that schema that we had earlier with our database, and then we had 10 different tables. Imagine you're only able to use one table at a time. That would be horrible because your data is not all sitting in one table. Oftentimes it's spread over 3, 4, 5, 10 different tables, and you need to be able to combine those to get the output that you need. And so joining is how you actually do that. So joining combines the rows from 2 or more tables based on related columns. Let's say we have our employee ID from the table that we were just working with, and then, we have the employee ID in another table. We're able to join those together based off the employee ID, which I'm sure we'll see in the next example. But joining is super, super important. There's a lot of different types of joins, and understanding them and really using them correctly it completely changes your output. So if you want to get the right output when you join something together, you have to make sure you know these joins. Now, I'm just going to briefly go over them, but this is something that you should definitely look up and see how to do. So first we have inner joins, and that's when the data from both of those columns from the different tables, when there's overlapping data. So that's what will be in our output. The left join takes everything from the left table, but only takes matches from the right table. Then it's the opposite for a right join. It takes everything from the right table, and then only what is matching from the left table. If you don't know joins, that's going to make zero sense to you. So I hope you go and you kind of dig into joins a little bit more. But that's what joins are. It's just how you connect data from different tables. Very, very, very important. But then we have subqueries, which is, it's not joining data together, but you are able to utilize other tables within subqueries. And how I like to kind of say a subquery is it's a query within a query. So you have your main query, and then you have a little mini query within it. And a lot of people will call those nested queries. And so it does help with simplifying things sometimes. I'm going to take a look at the examples, and I'll talk a little bit more about these because they can be a little bit confusing. But let's look at, there we go, joins. So this one is our joins one. So let's look at the syntax really quickly. First, we're selecting what columns we want from both of our tables. And then we're saying we want to join the customers table to the customer orders table. And then we have to specify what columns are the same, or what columns have similar data in these two tables. So now we're saying from the customer table, we're taking the customer ID, and from the customer orders table, we're also taking the customer ID. That's what that on part is. So we're specifying what columns we're pulling in. Now, as a little added bonus, and this is something that once you start using joins, you'll do every time. But a little bonus I wanted to add in here is when I do bakery.customers in the from clause, or the from statement, when I do bakery.customers, I use an alias C. And then when I do in the join on the customer orders, I use CO. So I'm aliasing those. Now, why am I doing that? Well, if you want to specify a column in your actual select statement, I'm selecting this column, and it just happens to be in both tables. You have to use that column. You have to specify what table are you pulling it from. So for example, and I didn't do it in this one, but there's a customer ID in both of these tables. So I can't just put customer ID in the select statement because SQL isn't going to know, which table does he want it from? I don't know. So using the alias and specifying I want it from the customers table. So I want C.customer ID. This really helps with shortening it, because otherwise, if you don't use that alias of C and CO, then when you're selecting in the select statement, it's going to be really long. So you have to do customers.first name, customer orders.last name, and it just gets really, really long. And it looks bad. So if you shorten it to that alias, you can use that throughout all of your statements, really, and all your query, and it just really simplifies it, makes it a lot easier. So that's what joins are. We're, again, getting it from different tables. We have two tables here we're pulling from. But now let's look at subqueries. Subqueries are really interesting. This one is a super simple, and I formatted it to where you could really see the subquery well. But subqueries are really interesting, and they can get really complex. But one thing I want to note, because a lot of people will say, well, what is the difference? What should I use, a join or a subquery? And just to be completely upfront, I try not to use subqueries a lot. But it's important to know because there are good use cases for it. But the reason I don't use a lot of subqueries, especially when I'm using a ton of data, is that it's a little bit slow. And joins, actually, not for everything, but 99% of the time, joins are going to be a lot faster. So just with speed, because I worked with a lot of data, like there were tens of millions or 100 millions of rows of data, using a subquery could take an extra like 5 or 10 minutes to run, and join would take like, a minute or something. And so you just have to, and this is something we'll talk about at the end, which is query optimization. And so, knowing how things operate on the back end, knowing how things process and how quickly they'll go is important to writing your queries. It's a more advanced thing that you learn as you get further on in your SQL career. But let's look at subqueries really quickly. So right here, you can see down to the right within these parentheses, I tried to make it really obvious. This is our subquery. And what this is it's a complete SQL statement or a complete SQL query, but it's within a outer query. So let's start from the very top. We're selecting everything from bakery.customers, but then we're going to say where our customer ID is in, and then we have our subquery. Now, in the subquery, we're not pulling from the customers table. We're pulling from a completely different table called ordered items. So now we're seeing what customers have actually ordered items in that ordered items table. And so we're saying we want customer IDs from the customer ID table or from the customers table where there's also a customer ID in the ordered items table. So we're pulling out in our output, you can see all of these people are people who have actually created or bought something and ordered items in that other table. So this is also something that you could do with a join. You could just join the customers to the ordered items table, and you could join those together. And so again, it's very specific on your use case, but in this instance, I would definitely be using the join. I just wanted to show that you could do it with a subquery. And again, if you're working with a small amount of data, it could be completely negligible in terms of speed. It could be an extra like 30 milliseconds, basically nothing. But I definitely want to kind of let you think of or make you think that when you get into the real a lot of companies, when you work with real data and you're working with large data at any Fortune 500 company, any tech company, they're going to have an insane amount of data. And so if you get a job at a smaller company, it's a little data, your queries might not translate perfectly over to the larger company that works with a lot more data. And that's definitely something to think about. Let's go on to the next thing. So we have window functions. Window functions it's not a more advanced group by, it's different, but it has more functionality and you can do, I think you can do more with it, but it's definitely to more of the advanced side. And it doesn't have as many, let me backtrack. Group by is great for looking at categorical data. It's really great for simple aggregations. But then when you get to window functions, it's kind of like a big step up in the kinds of things that you can do with it. But like I said, group by is just one of those fundamental concepts that you use for a lot of different things. But then window functions has some very specific use cases, and we'll look at an example in a little bit. And window functions are something that when I first started out, I never used. I didn't use it for probably even 6 months into my job, just because I was working with more of the simple stuff. But there came about a lot of different use cases where I was like, oh man, I can't do this with group by. It just doesn't work. Or my output isn't looking how I need it to look. I need to use a window function. So I had to use it. I had to learn it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the difference between group by and window function, and we'll kind of look at an output in the next slide. But what a window function does is you can perform these calculations and these aggregations, much like you can a group by, but you do it over a window or a subset of the data. And then in your output, it's not grouped together. It has its each individual row that it was already kept on. So it's hard to visualize it. We'll see in just a little bit. I hope. I can't remember if I gave an output in this example. But what you can really use it for is things like running totals, ranking, and finding moving averages. These are things that I often use it for. And there's things like row number, where you can give a number to every single row. And you can do that over sets of data. And the window functions are not just used for, looking at the data. These are things that, I've built entire reports, automated reports, and sent them to clients based off of window functions. So they're like, we need rolling totals for this data. That's easy. So I just create I create a window function for that rolling total. And then, I send that out as a report. That's really common. It's a really common type of thing that you'll see with window functions. Let's take a look and see if I included it. Okay, perfect. I'm glad I had this in the output. But here we're still working with this employees. So we have all of our employees. But typically what you do is with a group by is you'd group on something like their department. And if we wanted to look at their department, we wouldn't be able to use their names because all their names are unique. So with department, when we use group by, we'd put it all onto one row and we'd be able to use aggregate functions. Now, in this example, I wish I had included one other one, which would have been just like a partition. That's my fault and I apologize. But the ones that we're looking at are really interesting, and these are kind of ranking. These are ranking functions. So rank, dense rank, and row number. So you can see we're doing it. Let's look at the rank. So we have select first name and salary, and then we're looking at rank. Now, when we use this, we're going to break it up by something. Now, for us, when we're using these ranking functions, we don't have to break it up. So we just use order by. So we're ordering by the salary in descending. So we're taking the highest salary first, all the way down to the lowest salary. And you can see in our output, we have first name, salary, and then our salary rank. Now, this is going to rank our salary based off of the order that we put it in. So we ordered by salary. So the salary rank goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 6, 8. So we had a match between Dwight and Tom at 45,000. And because they were the exact same, rank is going to give them the same number, 6 and 6. And then for Carl, it skips down to 8. So these window functions are really fantastic. I wish I would have, and this is my fault, I do apologize, but I have a lesson on it. You can go watch on YouTube. But window functions are really great for then partitioning data. So again, I want one more. I need to go back in time and redo that. But if we compare it directly to the group by, when we grouped on department, we had to do the average of all the department, and then the department only had one row, right? With window functions, we could get the average of each department, but then we don't have to group them all in one row. We can have all of our data, but then at the very end, there's a column that has the average. And that's really, really useful. And then there are these different types of functions that are super useful for ranking as well. Let's go on to the next one. Give me one sec. So now we have optimizing SQL queries. This is talk about are a lot more advanced. These are things that I was learning from a lot of data scientists, data engineers who were really good at optimizing queries, because you have to take a step back. When you're working with small data sets, optimizing queries doesn't do anything. It may change it from 50 milliseconds to 49 milliseconds. It's negligible. But again, you have to imagine you're working at a big tech company. They have millions, if not billions, of rows of data. And you're joining to tables that have millions, and it gets really complex. So optimizing SQL queries is really used for improving the efficiency of how fast things run. And why is that important? I'll give you one example. We used at an old job I used to have, I was a data analyst, and we used to have this job that would run overnight, and we would do an entire process. So we would get the data from the source, we would clean the data using all the transformation rules that we had created, and then it would add that data to our pre-existing table. It was a whole process, and it ran, I think, every single night. Well, this was one of our biggest clients, one of our most important clients. And so this was like really, really important. And the process that we were using involved a lot of, simple stuff. It wasn't anything wild. It wasn't anything crazy. But there were some things that were taking a lot longer to run. And so I would go in with our data engineer and we would look at all these rules that we did for transforming the data. And we had to figure out how to optimize these SQL queries to run overnight. So sometimes if we did things incorrectly, it would take 11 hours to run. Well, what would happen is those doctors would then look at the data in the morning and it wasn't there. And so they would call us and they'd be upset. So it had to run in a specific amount of time. So we would optimize these queries and optimize our business rules that we made to transform that data. And we would have to make them as efficient as possible. And we got it down to about like 4 hours. It was a lot of data. It was a big process, but we got it down to about 4 hours. So that's the difference of a client being really happy and being really unhappy. Again, that's much more advanced stuff that, as an entry-level analyst, you probably won't be working on that much, doing really intense SQL optimization, but it's very important to know. So if you're kind of starting out, just remember this in the back of your head when you're working with these things. So what are some techniques that you can use for actually improving these speeds? One really big one, especially with big data, is indexing. Indexing I never worked with it until I started working at this company called Amerisource Bergen. They're like a Fortune 7 company. They're like number 7 on the Fortune 500 company or Fortune 500 list. I had never heard of it, but we worked with like 100 times larger data than I did at the small company I was working with. So I had to learn indexing really well. And I'll talk about indexing a little bit more in a second. But then we have you can rewrite your queries to just change the order of things, change if you're using a join versus a subquery versus joining on one column versus 2 columns. And then another thing, and this usually isn't for a data analyst, but this is something that I would work with like a database developer on or a data architect on, which is proper data modeling. Now, how you store your data, how the data actually sits in your database makes a big difference. Is it the correct data type? Is it stored efficiently? Do you have the right primary and foreign keys lined up? There's a lot of different things that go into data modeling and creating a good data architecture. And so that also can play a big part. Again, not something that most data analysts will use or need to know right away. But I think as you get to the senior level or lead analyst role, knowing how these things work can make a big difference, and you can really, show your worth by kind of pointing these things out, saying, "Hey, this is running inefficiently because of how our data is being stored." Yeah, the last part is kind of what I was talking about in my example, which is bottlenecks. So we have you have a lot of data flowing in from a lot of different sources, especially when at large companies, you have 10, 15, 20 different sources that you're getting data. Maybe the bottleneck is, it's all funneling into one place at one time, and that's your bottleneck. And so you need to stagger when you're bringing the data in and have that process done correctly so that you're not trying to bring everything in at once. That can be a huge bottleneck. And so, but there's a lot to that. Let's look at an example of this. So I have 3 examples that are, pretty simple. The first is the index. Now, indexing is when, and this is kind of a tough concept to just say off the top of my head, but I'm going to do my best. Indexing is where you kind of tell SQL, you say, "Hey, SQL, I'm going to be using this, in this example, these customer names a lot. And I want you to remember that in the back of your head, even though it isn't stored in a table this way in order, I want to index this customer name, and so that you remember it behind the scenes. And then when I query on customer name, you already remember it. You don't have to process it in the query. You're processing it already in the back end, and then it just goes a lot faster." To give a better example of indexing is something like, let's index, well, you can index anything. You can index any column, multiple columns. But let's say we're indexing like a product. So let's say we're working with Amazon data. There's a billion products on Amazon, right? And there are all sorts of names and all these different things. And the table that they're storing this this product information it's based off product ID. So it's ordered on product ID. Well, if we then go and create an index on the product name, and that it's stored in the back, kind of has it organized, when we then run a query based off of the product name, it's going to be able to retrieve that data faster because it already has it stored in order in the back. What it might have to do if you don't have an index is it's going to go into its memory. It's going to order all of it. And that takes a long time. There's billions of products. It takes a long time. It has to order it. Then it has to go back through and then select the one you want. So all of that work that is being done when you actually query it could be done with an index beforehand. And then anytime you query that product, it already has it and it can select it 10 times faster. In just like a speed example, I remember creating indexes that were very specific to what we needed. It's usually what you use an index for. Very, very specific to what we needed. And they would reduce the time for a query execution from like an hour down to like 5 minutes or 7 minutes. It was drastic. But just one more note on indexing. If you're going to try it out or you have used it before, indexing is very specific to types of queries. So really study what indexing is, how it works. But this is a concept that really advanced analysts and data engineers and people, they need to understand well for query optimization. The next one is just querying faster. Now, this example is super simple. It's basically, it could have been written like a subquery, but instead we used a join, and the join was faster. And so that's really all it is sometimes it's as simple as just changing around your query a little bit, knowing how things process on, behind the scenes to make them go faster. That really is what changing your query can do. And then the last thing, and this one is like more of a kind of a tip, because we'll get to our next one is automation, but we're going to get to this next one, which is you can analyze a query's performance using explain. And if you've never done this, go do it. Especially in MySQL. If you go to MySQL and you type in explain, and then you write a query, it's going to tell you, how fast it took, how many rows of data it had to look through. I use this explain a lot with indexing or other things, because indexing can show you, you only had to look through 3,000 rows of data instead of having to look through 100,000 rows of data. So again, it can explain why things are speeding up, what type of indexing it's using. Go and check that out. It's really fun to mess around with. I enjoy it. Sounded very nerdy, but it's true. All right, let's take a look at automation. Now, when I talk about automation, a lot of different things can come to your mind, right? But in SQL, it typically is using things like scripts, stored procedures, schedulers. These are things that most likely are built in, although you wouldn't believe the kinds of things you can do in SQL. You can write some really advanced, like what I would consider pretty advanced code in SQL. But you can also just use a lot of things that are built in, like stored procedures are things that you can just click, create stored procedure and write out what you want to have happen in that stored procedure. So it's really just automating those repetitive tasks. We use this a ton with bringing data in, so data ingestion. We use a lot of data automation with data cleaning. So, dirty data is coming in from the source. We write our data cleaning rules in our queries to clean that data. And then as it's coming in, it's automatically being cleaned and being put where it needs to be put. It's amazing. Another thing is creating reports. So just that data, you're grouping by data or you're using a Windows function on your data, and your client wants to see that. They want to see maybe a daily output of what that looks like, or, more likely like a monthly is what a lot of reports would be for clients. And you can schedule that and automate that using something like a scheduler and a stored procedure, or, a combination of all these things. But you can get that output of the query, and then you can put it into an Excel file and then send that to the client. That's automation. So you don't have to manually do that. It just saves so much time. Another thing that's really helpful for, and I already mentioned a few at the bottom, but another thing is something like backing up your data. This goes above what a data analyst should most likely be doing, but at a small company, you might. But backing up your database and making sure if your database or your server crashes, that you have a backup of that data, super important. So you can create backups. I think that's the example I used in the next one. But you can create backups. So this right here is a super simple automation of a nightly backup. That's all this is. So every single night, which is not common. Usually you do like once a quarter or something like, or once a month, depending on the company. But for this, it's a nightly backup. And so this event is, it's basically scheduling, saying, hey, every day, and you can specify even the day, the time, etc. We want to back that up and put like a copy of a database over here in a secure location where if anything were to happen, we would still have our data and our business could continue. Really important. And then down below, it's saying, do this, create the database, create the table, create that. And then you can automate that even further. I mean, it's really almost endless what you can do in SQL. Let me see. Yeah, so these are some real world examples. Now, I've talked about a few real world examples, but I did write down a few as well. So a lot of the things that just SQL, not the crazy advanced stuff, but just writing simple SQL queries, it can be used for things like managing your inventory, making sure you have the products you need at a company, for tracking your sales. I've done sales tracking a lot, analyzing customer data or analyzing patient data. I worked a lot in healthcare where we had to analyze a lot of patient data. So I was working with hematology oncology, which is blood and cancer. So I worked with cancer data for years. And so analyzing patient data, sending that back to pharmaceutical companies, to actual hospitals and saying, here are your stats, here are your survival rates. These are all things I did within SQL for years. Really, really useful stuff. I went a little bit beyond just that. You can also use it for web applications, something that I'm doing right now, which is you can use SQL to restore and retrieve data on websites. And so things like Amazon and all your favorite companies where they store products, or not even products, even like Netflix, they store a lot of data in databases that they're retrieving almost immediately. When you click on something, it's going in and getting that data. And SQL databases, as well as those processes and automated processes, are used in these systems and these websites and these platforms. The last thing, and this is more for data analysts, but data analysts can use it a lot for reporting, do a lot for just getting insights, performing exploratory data analysis, calculations, reports, data cleaning, data manipulation. It could go on, and I could say like 10 other things that's on the top of my head, but SQL is really important. It's one of those skills. And just to give you context, SQL is the first thing I ever learned as a data analyst. I kind of guessed. I looked up, I was like, what did data analysts need to know? And SQL popped up and I was like, let me try to learn that. It was really hard for me to learn, admittedly, but I can tell you over the course of my career, that is what's earned me the most money, and has been the most useful skill out of my entire career. More than Excel. Excel is just a little lower, but Excel's been super useful too. More than Tableau, Python, Power BI, any other tool, SQL has been my number one skill. And so, oh man, I made it in time. All right. I wasn't sure if I was too close to 1 o'clock, but SQL has been my number one skill. And even today, I do consult. Now I own my own business. I do a lot of consulting with companies. And a lot of times I'm talking to them about SQL. I'm talking how to, utilize SQL better with small companies, startups, et cetera, or use the cloud. I talk a lot about that. But, SQL is even transferable to the cloud, where I used a lot of SQL in Azure and AWS with databases in the cloud. So SQL isn't just an on-prem or on-premises database or server that's in your company. A lot of times now, most companies are using things like, or even CRMs, but are using things like, cloud platforms and cloud hosting platforms to store their data, or cloud storage to store their data. And so, SQL is, I can't say enough good things about SQL. It's just fantastic. It's amazing. Highly recommend learning it. I had to go through fast. Blame Career Foundry, blame William. I had to go through fast because we have a limited amount of time, but everything that I went through in this webinar are things that I 100% think you should learn at some point in your career. So some of those things like, the automation and query optimization, that stuff's, it gets a pretty advanced. It can be tough to learn, but I promise you it will pay out. It's super, super good stuff. I don't know, gets me excited. But that's all I got. I think William's going to come back. We'll do some Q&A. Hopefully you ask me about SQL because I love talking about SQL. I could talk about it all day.
Awesome, Alex. Thank you so much for presenting. Very enlightening, and a lot of questions came through. But for anyone out there who has got some lingering questions about SQL or anything related to data analytics, now is the time. I've got staff also on YouTube and LinkedIn, so do post your questions there too. We'll try and filter them through. I've got a couple of questions first to kick things off tonight. Alex, if you've got your desk and a data analytics CV lands on your desk from someone who's just starting out as a junior data analyst, what kind of programming languages would you like to see? What would be the kind of the top ones that you'd like to see on that CV?
Yeah, that's a great question. The first thing to remember is every company is different. So, when I talk about SQL, I'm going to kind of give you a broader, and then I'll get more specific. I always talk a long time. I apologize. Every company is different. So some companies might not even use SQL, but try to look at like the numbers. What are the percentage of companies that are hiring data analysts that are using SQL? It's going to be a high amount. And so you want to kind of play the numbers. So SQL is a skill just to have on your resume because a lot of companies use it. But what would I be looking at? Let's say I'm just hiring for, I'm pretending I was a hiring manager, but I'm pretending I'm at my old company. I was hiring for the position that I used to have as a data analyst. We used a lot of SQL, Excel, we were in the Microsoft shop, Power BI, Azure, Python, even some more advanced stuff. And genuinely when I was on the hiring team, we were hiring data analysts, business analysts, and we really just wanted a strong SQL foundation. We wanted, with a business analyst, we just wanted a little bit of SQL, a little Excel. But for data analysts, we wanted a strong SQL foundation, and we would do technical tests to make sure that was on their resume was good. But we would always look for SQL. We wanted to see if they had some experience. And that experience wasn't always as a data analyst because we were a healthcare company. So sometimes we would hire nurses who were nurses for 20 years, but we really needed someone who knew SQL though. So they learned SQL in their part-time, but they had crazy in-depth knowledge of domain knowledge. And so, that's something to think about, is utilizing your previous experience. And then we always wanted to see Excel. And so, for those types of positions, we were mostly looking for the fundamental skills and then good domain knowledge. But again, it varies widely. If a company doesn't use SQL, they have to store data somehow, right? Maybe they use pandas, or in Python, maybe they use pandas, maybe they just use Excel or some CRM database that doesn't use SQL. But your database knowledge with SQL is still transferable to a lot of those things, and you have experience using data. So just trying to tie it back to SQL.
Awesome. Just following up on the question here from MU. So if that kind of CV lands on your desk and the person only knows Excel and SQL, do you think they've got a good chance of getting a job on the market?
It's possible. It is possible. That's all they need. If you know that well, that may be all you need. And in fact, I say maybe. I know for a fact because my first job that I was hired for, I only had SQL and Excel on my resume. Because that's all I knew. But as I got more advanced, I was like, oh, I need more things. This is kind of sad to look at. There's some other core skills in there, but it's definitely possible. It's just, I think, for a resume to get into the interview, I would recommend a few more skills that showcase that data better. But SQL and Excel are absolutely fundamental, fantastic skills to start out with.
Awesome. And these are kind of like hard skills, but as a data analyst, working in a career, how important do you think soft skills are in this profession? You
hit me at the perfect time, because literally yesterday I recorded a video on this that'll be released in a couple of weeks. You hit me the perfect timing. There's a whole process, right? You're trying to get a job. In order to get into an interview, your hard skills are what are going to get you into that interview. You could put leader, you could put good communicator, you could put, good team worker, whatever you want to put on your resume. it's not going to get you an interview. They need to know you have the hard skills. So the hard skills get you into the interview. Then in the interview, the hard skills, again, they'll press on it. They become a little less important in the actual interview because they already know you have it. They're just kind of confirming, but your soft skills are what really is going to sell you. I can speak for myself. My soft skills probably got me most of my jobs when I was first starting out because I didn't have many hard skills. So I was really motivated. I was really excited to work, to get into the field. And so I think that shone through. And I think that probably more or less got me most of my first 2 jobs. In the actual work, is hard skills or soft skills more important? I think hard skills are just ever so slightly more important. You have to be able to get your work done. But here's where soft skills come into a huge play in your actual work. You have to know how to work with people because you don't work in a silo. I'm sorry, all those introverts out there. I also thought you could just work in a silo, but you can't. You're usually on a team and there's clients and customers and stakeholders and managers. Like you're always communicating with somebody. So those building those relationships between managers, between coworkers, and depending on them for certain parts of your job, it's really important. You have to know, how to communicate, how to get along, how to prioritize, how to time things, how to schedule things. These are all soft skills that if you don't do well in it, it can really cripple your hard skills. That's where it becomes a lot more of a, you need both.
Great answer. And so the video is dropping soon, the soft skills video?
I think in maybe next week, maybe 2 weeks.
Wow. I think this would be also a great time to just plug Alex's YouTube channel. So anyone from the Career Foundry audience, anyone on Big Marker, do go and check out Alex's channel, Alex the Analyst, over on YouTube. I think when we first started doing webinars together, you're about 200,000, and now you're well over 500,000. So the voice of data analytics is Alex. Do subscribe to Alex's channel. And also another shout out to Alex's fans tonight who've joined us. Now, a few questions have come in over on YouTube, and it's a question we get asked a lot also at Career Foundry. So when you're just starting out in data analytics, or even prior to that, you're studying, how do you actually get practical experience? A lot of jobs are saying we want to see, some experience, we want to see a portfolio, we want to see projects, but if you've not worked in the field before, where do you get that practical experience from?
Yeah, super important. Really, a question that a lot of people when they're first starting out ask. They're like, this entry-level job needs a year experience. I don't have that. How do I get a year experience if I can't get a job? There's a few different things you can do, and I'm going to add one bonus thing at the end, which is something that I just recently have been talking about. The first thing is, and probably the most popular and the best thing to do. This is the best thing in my opinion to do. It's just build projects. It sounds so simple, but most people don't do it. And then they miss out on the people who, like hiring managers, who value that. And I myself was a hiring manager where I valued that. Projects, let's take SQL, for example. You take a big data set, you bring it in, you analyze it, you write some advanced queries, you really dig into it. You can put that up on GitHub, and that's a project. And then when, on your resume, you can even have a projects section. The project section, it's really great for pointing to and saying, they're going to ask you in an interview, do you know SQL? How well do you know SQL? If they're using SQL, they're going to ask you this. You don't want to say, oh, I just took a course. That's a bad answer. It does not look good. They're like, oh, this guy's only taking courses. That's not good. What you want to say is, I just, this project that I was working on, that sounds so much better. This project I was working on, I was analyzing some customer trends and Amazon data. And you can even make projects that are specific to a domain. So I was in healthcare. I used to have, I still do, but I have healthcare projects that I used that were specific to my domain. And they would ask me, tell us about how you use SQL. I could point to those projects and be like, working with ICD codes, CPT codes, here's how I found these patterns or whatever within, diagnoses. And so those projects is my number one thing. The second thing would be, before the bonus, the second thing would be volunteering. So that's actually one thing that I did when I first started out. There's a local charity that I donated to. I really liked what they did. But then I went on their website and I was like, oh boy, they're doing some like visualizations to try to showcase how much they're helping. I'm like, these are bad. So I messaged the company just saying, hey, I'd love to volunteer, redo this for you guys, just pro bono, because I like your cause. And they let me do it. And I put that on my resume, and it was great. So that's like another thing you can do. Now, here's the most recent. This is my bonus one. And this is the most recent thing I've kind of been getting into and really like studying and like looking at, which is freelancing. Freelancing is not something I personally ever did. I do consulting now, which is a little bit different, but freelancing. So going on companies like Fiverr, OfferUp, and then doing these things, it can be hard to find clients at first. That's why it's my last one. But I think in the future, I think freelancing is going to be a lot bigger than it is now, especially in the data world, mostly due to remote work and AI. I think a lot of smaller companies who have never used data before are going to start wanting to utilize data, and they're going to want little tasks done here or people to come in and kind of advise them here and there, where freelancing will become a lot more popular because they don't want to hire on a full data team. They can't afford it, or they don't want to invest that much in data infrastructure. So I think freelancing is something that is going to be more prominent in the future. And it's something that can give you experience with smaller tasks and smaller projects, just like one-off with companies. It can also lead to full-time jobs. I just talked to somebody the other day who I posted on LinkedIn about freelancing, and someone was like, yeah, freelancing led to my first job. I freelanced for this company. They gave me a shot. I did well. Freelanced with them for 3 months, and they hired me on full time. So, freelancing can lead to bigger things as well. So that's everything I got in this head about that.
I completely agree as well. I think our career specialists at Career Foundry would recommend also reaching out to your network. Everyone's got family, friends, or relatives, or friends of friends who maybe have small businesses who need a little bit of help sometimes, whether it's with the design, the UI design, or if it's the data analytics. So 100% agree there. Look in your network, you will find real world projects. They're probably a little bit closer than you probably think.
Yeah, no, I agree with that.
Alex, let's zoom out a little bit here and let's look at some challenges. So, what do you think are some common challenges or roadblocks that beginners in data analytics often encounter?
So like learning SQL or using it?
I would say just in terms of like data analytics in general, when you're starting out, what are some challenges? But also we can zoom in as well on SQL.
Broadly speaking, when you're first getting into analytics, I think one of the biggest challenges, and this is something that I've talked to a lot of different people about, so it's not just my opinion, which is you don't know what you don't know. When you're first getting started, you kind of get dropped into like a company and you don't know anything. And it's really daunting to go into a company and you have to learn their data infrastructure, how their processes and their workflows and where all their data is, their customers. It's really tough, especially if you don't already have previous experience as a data analyst. It's really tough. So I would say that's probably one of the biggest challenges, is just being very overwhelmed and feeling like you don't know anything. It's really tough. With SQL specifically, I think one of the biggest challenges is you encounter a lot, especially in a workplace, you encounter a lot of people who know it really well, who've been doing it for 10, 15, 20 years and can write it backwards and forwards. And when you're first getting started, like me, when I first got it started, man, I felt like the biggest imposter in the world. I was like, I don't belong here. Like that guy, my boss, who at the time, my boss was like crazy good at SQL, like was writing advanced stuff I'd never seen before. I was like, what is he doing? That's not SQL. That's like some different language. It was really intimidating because I saw everyone else doing really well in it and I wasn't doing well. So I think that's one of the bigger challenges is it's in the real workplace, when you're practicing it and learning it, you get these little small use cases and you learn everything. But then when you get into the real world, it's like a mountain was dropped on you. But you just have to like climb that mountain until you like learn enough and know enough to get there. And so I think those are the biggest challenges for those two.
And what do you think some of the tips are for overcoming imposter syndrome when you're just starting out, as you just mentioned?
Yeah, I had quite a bit of imposter syndrome when I first started out. I think the biggest thing for me personally, and I'll give another advice, but that didn't really help me. But the number one thing that helped me was I just studied like crazy. I would go home after, and I don't recommend this. I really needed that job. Like I was pretty poor. So like I really needed that job. So I'd go home and study the stuff that I was doing at work to make sure that the next day I could do a better job. I don't do that anymore, but I used to do that. And that for me, I was like, okay, my skill level's getting better. I'm starting to do what they need me to be able to do. That gave me a lot of confidence. And so that for me was the best. The next thing, and I guess I kind of did this, but it helped other people more, I think, which is really trying to connect with people at your work and letting them mentor you. I did have a mentor at work, but I don't think that helped with my imposter syndrome. I kept having to ask him questions and I felt bad. I was like, hey, how do you do this? I don't know how to do this. So that didn't help me, but I have heard from many people who said the exact opposite. They were like, I went to my boss or I went to my coworker and I asked, and they helped me. And that really helped me gain more confidence in my skills and being part of the team. So I think everybody's a little different, but yeah, imposter syndrome hits everybody. Even at 3 years in, I hit it a little bit for like a couple months where I was like, man, these people are really good. And I'm like not at their level. But you just kind of catch up. You just got to do what you got to do to catch up and show your worth and take on good projects and do a good job.
I've got some flashbacks of joining a new sports team when you kind of like look at the team and think, maybe not, maybe I'm not going to be as good as the other people here. There's also a couple of questions coming in on Big Market and on YouTube about, how essential is it to have statistics and also math as part of data analytics? Is it an essential component if you're starting out?
Okay. All right. I'm going to be a little controversial here. And if you know basic math and super basic statistics, you can do most of what you need as a data analyst. I don't think you need to go crazy in depth. Now, when I first started out, I was using, for most of my job, for almost 3 or 4 years, I was just using averages, window functions with aggregations and stuff. That's mostly what I did. I was never using like any type of regression analysis and stuff like that, which is more math heavy. Now, as I've gotten more advanced, as I've gotten more into my career at a mid-level, senior level, that's where I think the statistics and math come more into play. One other thing is I think that there are certain domains that lean more heavily on statistics, like financial analysis. If you're going into finance, you're going to be most likely using a lot more statistics and a lot more math than you would if you worked with something like at my company, which was healthcare. We would do, at least for the data analyst part of our data science team, we would do, some more advanced stuff with pretty, longer calculations, but it wasn't like anything crazy. It was like, take this and this and this and this and divide and multiply and, to get what we need to get a percentage, but it wasn't anything crazy. So like, I think that scares a lot of people, but I don't think me personally, I don't think it's as important as a lot of people say for most people. That's my caveat.
A little bit of controversy. I am mindful of the time. I will be taking some more questions. I'm trying to group questions together because I see some ones which are coming through which are similar. Alex, the industry moves very fast. How do you keep up to date? What are the resources that you use to kind of keep up to date with everything that's going on?
Okay. So I am not everywhere, but everyone that's around me is everywhere. So they send me things. I would say I learn a lot from having a good community. My Alex the Analyst channel has a fantastic community. I also have a Discord where people will send me things all the time. And they're like, hey, have you heard about this new programming language called Mojo? And I'm like, I haven't heard about it. Let me look into it. I also learn a lot, believe it or not, from Twitter. Twitter's just it's a black hole of information. So you can get lost pretty quick. But at my level, I can kind of filter it pretty quickly. Like, I don't need to know that. Oh, that's really interesting. And so Twitter, LinkedIn, Medium, just a good community. I would say, though, I probably get maybe like 40% from my community sending me things and sending me messages on LinkedIn and in emails. Then I get like 30% from, or maybe 20% from LinkedIn, 20% from Twitter, and then 20% from somewhere else. But that's when I get a lot of my information, at least.
Fantastic. And also, how essential is it to have a portfolio of your work?
It's not mentality on it. And it'll either make 100% sense or no sense. When I apply to jobs, I think about it in percentages. So I'm applying to a job. If I just send in a resume, let's say I have a 5% chance of getting an interview. But if I send in a resume and I have a portfolio, maybe I have a 7% chance. And if I send in a resume and this, and I talk to a recruiter, I have a 10% chance. I look at it in terms of percentages of likelihood of getting interviews or getting a job. I think anything that can improve your odds, you should be doing. So if that's a cover letter, you know what? Do a cover letter. I don't do them, but do them if you think it's going to improve your chances. A portfolio is going to improve your chances. In my opinion, it's just going to, even if it's just by 2%. But then you expand that to 300 different applications. That's very useful. That could make the difference between getting an interview or not. So I personally really recommend it. I always push the people I work with, I mentor, on my YouTube channel, I always push people to creating some type of portfolio.
Awesome, fantastic. I will just say there that the key takeaway on the Career Foundry program is a key takeaway when you do a Career Foundry program. Alex, thank you so much for presenting this evening. I know we've run a little bit over time. I'm sorry that I couldn't take everybody's questions. There were a lot of questions. There are also some very specific questions. What I would say is definitely go over to Alex's channel. There's some fantastic videos over there. Do subscribe also, because I know that the Career Foundry YouTube team are in the background. Do check out the Career Foundry YouTube channel. For anyone who is interested in data analytics and has enjoyed this session this evening, I'm just going to share a link on BigMarker, but next week we're going to be joined by Dr. Humera, who is doing a skills workshop, which is going to be looking at Google Sheets, and it's taking it from the raw data right the way through to visualization. So I'm going to post a link there. Switch the slide over, this slide over very briefly. And for anyone who is interested in doing a program with Career Foundry, we are currently offering a tuition reduction of up to 17% off of our career change programs. And all you have to do is book a call with a program advisor, either on BigMarker, just by clicking the sticky note, or if you're watching on YouTube, you'll find the link below in the description. And you can book a call with one of our program advisors. I know them all personally, and they are there to answer any questions that you may have about the industry, jobs in your locality, or anything about the Career Foundry program. Also, do check out the Career Foundry blog, and thank you so much for all of the questions this evening. They were really, really good, and love to see so much engagement. And Alex, thank you so much for joining us again. Have we got another event coming up soon?
Not yet, but that skills workshop sounds fun. We should do one of those.
We should do that. Alex, we're definitely going to have you back on the channel. I feel that the next time I'll have you back on the channel, we'll have 1 million subscribers. I feel every time,
I hope so.
every time we do one of these, you get another 200,000 subscribers. But thank you so much for presenting this evening, and thanks for everyone for joining, and we will see you all next time. And we've recorded this, so tomorrow I'm going to be sending out the email with everything, so don't worry about that.